Hello and welcome to the call, everyone. My name is Sean Wilmon. This is my co-host,
Joe
beautiful
Zamora.
and illustrious Joe Zamora. Um, we're the solutions experts here at NewBlue, and I think today is going to be a lot of fun. We're showcasing a new product live for the very first time. We're giving away thousands of dollars worth of software, and more people have registered for today's webinar than any of the ones before.
Yeah.
How these sessions work is that we send out a registration invite to any of our customers that we think may benefit from a live demo. So today, a lot of Titler Live users are here inside the chat, but we also try to get partners, vendors, resellers, and other folks in the broadcast industry to join as well, because we want a whole bunch of smart people in here. That way, if there's something that's outside of the scope of Joe and I's expertise, hopefully someone will know the answer. So, we encourage you to be active in chat. We'll chime in and answer questions whenever we get a moment. And if there's anything that we don't get to, shoot us an email over webinars@newblueinc.com. It's over on the screen right down there. And we will get back to you as soon as we can. Oh, skipped ahead one slide on my teleprompter. So let's get to the good stuff. Titler Live 5, that is why we're here. That's what we're going to be talking about, what we're going to be showing you, and what we're going to be giving away for free to a handful of lucky people. The features that we're able to bundle in Titler 5 are, I think, I'd say over the last year, they're probably some of the most commonly requested features.
Yeah, they are.
That we've gotten. Yeah. And Joe and I are always talking to people. We do training sessions for, all NewBlue products. So we hear firsthand what people want. And one of the things people have been saying is that they really want cloud-based spreadsheet support. Well, now with Titler Live 5, we have that. I keep skipping ahead of my teleprompter here. So through Google Drive integration, you'll be able to host your spreadsheets online with stuff like your infographic data, your lower thirds, share it with your team, and then tap into that in the middle of a broadcast if need be to drive your graphics. And Joe's going to show us how to do that. Another big request that we've gotten is the implementation of object following in Titler Live. If you don't know what object following is, it's the automatic moving and scaling of graphical objects to match newly entered text. This has incredible synergy with cloud-based spreadsheets because it can be driven by someone else or even driven during a broadcast, God forbid, and the graphic will be ready to go instantly without any more work being done on it. Joe's going to go over that as well. Also new to Titler Live is the ability to control your PTZ cameras from directly within the Titler Live interface. I actually had the opportunity to sit down with Stephen Haywood from PTZ Optics, virtually, of course, because it's the future and we all just do that now, and talk with him about this brand new integration. And I've got a clip I'm going to bring up right now.
So the question that always comes up is, what is a PTZ camera and who uses them? And basically the short answer is it's a pan, tilt, and zoom camera. And basically anybody can use it, whether you're a solo producer or whether you're somebody producing sports, you're doing plays, you're doing music events, it doesn't matter. Anybody can use a PTZ camera. The thing that makes our cameras stand out amongst other cameras in the industry is that we are working with a lot of industry professionals and companies to include our cameras, our setups, our systems, and tightly integrate them into software and hardware devices that are available in the industry. The fact that we're on top of NDI, constantly keeping our cameras updated with the latest firmware, giving you the best possible optics that you can get from our cameras. So one of the things that excites me most is how you can control our cameras many different ways. We have a multitude of joysticks that you can buy, from our G3, G4 lineup, all the way up to our SuperJoy, which is my personal favorite. That controller gives you the ability to output to an HDMI monitor, so you can basically see what you're doing with the camera, make the changes without affecting anything inside of your broadcasting hardware or software. We also have other means, such as iPhone apps right now that are being developed and currently being updated as always. So there's a lot of great options. And also with our hardware and software partners that we have, including NewBlue. NewBlue just integrated the PTZ control over NDI in Titler Live 5, which is super exciting. My experience with Titler Live 5 and the PTZ optics, PTZ integration in general has been very, very pleasant. I was fortunate enough to be an early beta tester, and I just seen this feature grow into a seamless integration over NDI to be able to add the cameras that you want, be able to control them in a timeline, be able to adjust and move the camera as needed within a very powerful piece of software as it is. So one of the things I'd really like to stress to people out there, we're always constantly pressing and pushing the envelope from our NDI integration, but also our self-tracking cameras that we have with our partner company, our sister company, if you will, HuddleCam HD, and the SimpleTrack 2 being a tracking camera, being able to move with you and have that integration as a regular PTZ camera or an auto tracking camera. This industry is blowing up in the sense of having tight integrations with these types of cameras, so you don't need a camera operator. NewBlue has done it again in Titler Live 5, giving you that ability to control our cameras very easily and very robustly.
You know, Stephen was absolutely right about the broadcast industry blowing up right now. Not only were we already on the precipice of a digital revolution of broadcast technology, but the pandemic has really accelerated things. So you need to be innovative to stay ahead of the curve. So, you know, here we are with a bunch of new exciting features. I see a question from Jim. Can you elaborate on Titler Live Control of PTZ cameras? That's a great question, and absolutely, we're going to be talking about actually doing a live demonstration of a PTZ camera here during the call.
Yeah, so with Titler Live 5, we noticed that a lot of users wanted to take advantage of a variety of different elements that pretty much put together their entire broadcast. Because with Titler Live 4, a lot of the focus was pretty much bringing graphics on air via whether it was NDI, SDI, HDMI. But one of the things that we can now take advantage of through Titler Live 5 exclusively is the ability to bring in two different types of new layers, that being live video variable or live video feeds and media clips. So this pretty much allows you to unite all the elements of your broadcast under one interface, and that's super convenient for everybody to use. And you don't have to now be worrying about running your different elements of your broadcast on separate windows, making sure that all those pieces of software are running properly, and therefore running less overhead since you're running less programs to unite all those broadcast elements. The other idea is to continue supporting different methods of output. So as always, we integrate with leading solutions, NDI and SDI solutions, as well as now we have a new method of output that is known as virtual webcam out. So we understand that a lot of broadcasters are doing things like we are right now broadcasting through Zoom. So the most effortless way of doing that is through direct virtual webcam out. So now that is a method of output through Titler Live 5. The other thing that we like to focus on when it comes to NewBlue and our Titler Live product is to provide users the ability to access real-time data and to have this data update dynamically through their graphics. We understand that this can come down from the most simple implementation, which is lower thirds, down to something a lot more complex when it goes to scorebug graphics, where we have multiple different fields and visual elements updating, like scores, clocks, possessions, and even player information such as images and team names. This all can be driven by data sources that you then connect to, and you also have the option to maybe perhaps drive those manually if that is your preferred method of operation. Apart from just being able to drive graphics with real-time data, you have the ability to also customize these graphics through our designer interface. This allows our graphics to work with a variety of different things that we call variables to give you the different methods of customization through our playout interface, along with other ways to make these graphics represent other things like color, which makes it great for branding, images, logos, even importing video elements if you desire to use those as visual elements for your graphics.
So we're going to jump into a screen share in just a moment, and Joe is going to show us some of the new features in the interface with Titler Live 5. But I think I just want to take this opportunity to go through just a couple more questions that we've got here inside chat. So I'm scrolling up a little bit. We're seeing a lot of hellos. Tom Jensen, hello from Denmark. Hi, Tom. George R. I can't tell if this is a big upgrade or simply Titler Live 4 repackaged with some ancillary features. Ooh, a hard-hitting question. So Obviously, any upgrade is going to share features with the previous versions. Ultimately, I feel like it's a judgment call on how you want to exactly categorize that. I will say, though, we are really confident in how the new features completely change, or could conceivably completely change, your approach to your graphics in your broadcast itself. One of the things that is a total paradigm shift, and the reason it's, probably upgraded to a whole new product, is the ability to add in live video sources, media files, stuff like that. So instead of controlling just your graphics, you could, in a sense, have a lot more freedom to control all of your various clips. So, for example, when we had the clip from Stephen Haywood at PTZ Optics earlier, that was just a media file dragged right into the Titler Live timeline. So that wasn't something we had to do from the switcher. That was something that was entirely done, treated as a graphic and operated as a graphic. Again, Joe's going to be showing you the same thing with how you get sort of the mindset with PTZ cameras and live camera feeds. And that's just one example. And of course, there's a whole bunch of new features such as the object following the Google Sheet, stuff like that we mentioned. Colin Kendall, hello. Ooh, we got some Colin from the UK. We got Terry in Anchorage, Alaska. Jason, Tyler can already push NDI to Streamlabs OBS/desktop. Oh, because Scott Huddy right before that. Live webcam out, super convenient. So Tyler 4 could always do an NDI out, and then if you downloaded a certain Streamlabs or OBS plugin, then you would be able to pull that NDI feed into your broadcast. But one of the features now with Titler Live 5 is the ability to actually output directly as a webcam, which can be pulled directly, not only from OBS, but stuff like your Zoom calls and your Skype calls, things like that. So the virtual webcam gives you a lot more flexibility in that regards. And then I think the last question that we are going to get to right now before we jump in from, it looks like Manuel Hager, will there be support for Apple's new M1 processors? That was actually, I believe that was 5.1. Wasn't that just released?
We're still looking into the M1. I believe the timeline is going to be relatively soon for that support for M1.
Okay.
The 5.1 release was more so for the sports integrations and some bug fixes.
Okay. Yeah, it was, we know it's on the roadmap very, very soon. One of the first updates to come out right now.
One thing that Robert did clarify in the chat, that we have compatibility, but it's not native support. So that is pretty much running through Rosetta 2 so that it can at least run through M1.
Great. Okay, well, I think that's what we get, 12:15. Why don't we go ahead and get started in our demo?
I'll go ahead and begin my screen share so that I can begin to demonstrate the product. So here we see the Titler Live 5 interface. If you're familiar with our previous product, Titler Live 4, you'll probably notice some small differences in terms of the UI. Do note, and don't panic, it's nothing too crazy. It's more so in the sense of us trying to make the interface a lot more intuitive as to what you can expect certain things to look like, as to certain things. Like a quick example, the way the tabs are organized. So it's a small change, but for new users and existing users, it kind of reinforces the logic of how it is that you should operate the interface. We can see right away that I have some things already populated into this particular project that I'm showing off. Kind of one of the things that we can see right away is that right here on the left-hand side, I have my graphics library docked. This is where you can pretty much search for any graphics that you want to use that we deliver with the product. Do note that between the 3 different editions of the software, you will be provided with a different set of graphics packages. And these graphics packages pretty much correspond to the use case for those particular product lines. So for example, if you got something like Titler Live 5 Present, then things that are in the presentation environment like House of Worship, live conferencing, corporate presentations, those are the types of graphics families you'll see there. And for sport, we will see the typical things that you might have seen for Titler Live 4, except we have expanded those graphics packages to 2 new different families. So now you have your score bugs in 3 different styles. You have all your stats graphics in 3 different styles, etc. Title broadcast contains all of the things that that present and sport include, plus an additional handful or several new graphics families that have been created. One of those examples is the executive collection in there, which contains some of these corporate graphics that are a lot more stylized in a sense. It's not very simple, but we have a lot more stylized things as well. We have also the ceramic family that I'll be using for this particular example here. So upon clicking on any of these graphics families folders, we will see that it contains a large, pretty much quite a collection of items that we could use to pretty much compose a production that is to our liking. This particular family of graphics is themed after live event, or more so business corporate kind of environment. You can see by some of the styling decisions done and the way some of these graphics are laid out, it fits in quite nicely to that kind of a style of graphic. If we want to add any of these graphics to our playlist, it's simply a matter of previewing any of these by hovering over the graphic thumbnail. We can simply hold and drag over directly into our channel. Then we will see that once we've added that graphic, we will see a small little render dial complete itself to pretty much let us know once this graphic is ready for playback, denoted by the green check mark. Kind of going over that process and how it is that it kind of interplays with this, what we call the layers list and the channel panel. Any graphics that we add to an existing channel, like channel 1 as on screen, will pretty much build out a playlist of graphics for that particular channel, and that list being composed of different layers. So them being layers, we automatically have the layer hierarchy. So if a particular graphics layer is above another, let's say, for example, this message lower third sits above lower third below it, then those elements, if positioned in the same area, will pretty much overlap. So let's, for example, show this off real quick. We can see that those two overlap each other. That might seem a little odd if I'm doing that in a broadcast, but you can start thinking about different ways of pretty much having some interplay, some visual interplay between your different graphics elements in case you want to like have certain things revealed behind other objects and things like that. Another thing that we can see with this little interface on the bottom right is the ability to access different channels and what we refer to as the channel panel. So if I add an additional channel, do note that this is limited to broadcast only. So if you have present and sport, you only have one channel of graphics. And I'll elaborate a little bit further on some of the differences between the three different product lines when it comes to the different layers you can have and the channels that you have available to use. So let's go ahead and add an additional channel of graphics. We can now see that we have two different channels now displaying on our program monitor. Our program monitor is pretty much going to display a live playback of our graphics, kind of working as a functioning as a program preview. So we can kind of see how these graphics are playing out all live. So for example, if I wanted to add additional graphics to this particular channel 2, then we can begin to add this ceramic bullet list, for example, and we can see now that we have a separate graphic layer rendering out on channel 2. I can play something very quickly on channel 1 and see that I have now a graphic playing through channel 1. Switching over to channel 2 will then allow me to play a second graphic on channel 2. Do note that both of these graphics remain live. So kind of expanding on the feature of having a channel or different channels for your broadcast through Tatler Live is that we have different methods of output when it comes to pretty much transmitting what it is that your Tatler Live will be showing off on your feed. So we're here no monitor, which is pretty much the default as to I don't want to transmit any of these as sources. Then we have NDI, which is pretty much the growing trend of using your sources over NDI. It's convenient, it's seamless, and anybody can incorporate it if they have a local area network that they can operate with. The way that the channels work over NDI is, let's say, for example, I have a graphic playing over channel 1, or I have an active channel 1, meaning that it's simply existing in my project. We will now be able to retrieve channel 1 as an NDI source. Channel 2 will also be behaving as its own individual NDI source, meaning that if you have, for example, a software switcher that is capable of receiving NDI feeds, then you can bring these two separate channels as their own individual source. Going on to the next type of thing that we could possibly do is HDMI. HDMI pretty much allows you to build out a a capture monitor that you could use for chroma keying or luminance keying. So we can see here that we have 3 different options when it comes to generating a color that we can key out, whether it be black for the luminance or green or blue for chroma. And we can pretty much interpret from this that depending on the type of switcher that you'd be using and what kind of key you would be using to pretty much have your graphics play through the switcher, then this will be where you would manage those settings so that it pretty much interacts the way it should be with that switcher. The other setting we have here is, since my machine is currently lacking an SDI card, but if it did, you'd see that option pop up. Pretty much what the way that SDI works with our software is every single channel that we see here is a pair of SDI lines. So for example, if I wanted to do channel 1 over SDI, lines 1 and 2 for my SDI cables will be my pair for my channel 1. So those are my key and fill pairs for channel 1. Then for channel 2, I will have pairs 3 and 4 to be my key and fill pairs for that. So technically you'd be using 4 lines of SDI so that we can achieve the graphics for channels 1 and 2. So pretty much it's in pairs of 2 the way that you could align it to the way the channels are displayed on the interface. The other ones that we can see here are watch folder PNG sequences and direct to OBS. The new one is virtual webcam. So virtual webcam does only operate through one channel. So for example, I would need to have only one channel of graphics to operate through virtual webcam. And just like kind of the way that NDI works and SDI works is, or HDMI even, is simply playing out these graphics will then populate them onto my screen and onto my feed. If you wanted to, for example, and then I will go over into further detail, bring in a live video source directly into your channel, then you can overlay all your graphical elements above that live video source, whether it be a webcam of yourself, or an audience that you want to then transmit, or like a conference room, then you can overlay that with graphics and send that over virtual webcam. If you've used our other product, VividCast, it's pretty much the same output method. It's just that now we've incorporated that value proposition into now using TireLive 5, which is something that TireLive 4 lacks, the virtual webcam. So going on to then the actual layers themselves and the types of layers that we've added into the software. So as I've gone over and with the previous ones, these all currently in my playlist are graphic layers. You will see that they are denoted in my channel as this blue little icon. So that's how we can immediately identify them as graphic layers. Simply right-clicking on the actual channel will give me a drop-down that allows me to bring on different kinds of things into the channel. We can see that by pressing on hovering over new, we have 2 different options, graphic and live video. Under live video, we will see 4 different options for adding live video sources into our channel. The first being Windows device or Mac device, depending on the operating system that you're on. Windows device will allow you to pretty much find any of the USB enabled devices that are actively on your machine so that you can directly feed them into the channel. The other being NDI. So if you have NDI sources in your local network, you can pretty much bring in those NDI sources directly into your channel. So I'm going to go ahead and bring in this PTZ Optics camera that we have in the office, provided kindly by PTZ Optics themselves. And we can see that with exclusive to PTZ cameras themselves, when connecting them, and one other thing that I want to mention too is that the PTZ controls are something exclusive to TireLive Broadcast. So if you want to take advantage of this feature, it is going to be behind the broadcast version of the product. Now we can see that for when bringing in the live video source, we have the option to enable downstream keying. So if you want this video element to be below all your graphical elements or any other elements that you have on your channel, then we would lock it for downstream keying. We also have the ability of playing out different presets that we have built. However, if we don't want to use a preset and we want to start kind of angling our camera so that we can start understanding the way that this camera can be built out for our shots, we can see that we can use the pan controls to pretty much pan the camera. We can tilt the camera, and as you probably assumed as well, we can zoom the camera. We can also do these controls by holding control and dragging to reposition from the actual monitor screen here. And another thing that we have access to is auto-focusing or manual focus. So if we want to manually focus that camera, we can see it since I focused it out of that zoom radius, it is now a little bit blurred, but then I can auto-focus with the button so we can take advantage of that feature. We have also built out some presets so that I can quickly demonstrate how it is that navigating through these presets works through this interface. Clicking on preset 1 will pretty much give us a shot of the windows there in the office. Preset 2 will kind of give us a little rotation and then zoom into a different area of the office. Preset 3 will pretty much get a little configured zoom in there and those little gears on the top. And then 4, we can just kind of navigate through and see that all these presets can be built within the interface and be readily accessed from the interface. So it's a pretty convenient feature to have if you're using PTZ cameras and want to kind of, set up while you are building out your project and then have access to that from here. And kind of how I was mentioning, if for a reason you're using that virtual webcam workflow, simply selecting that virtual webcam with one of your live video sources on the background, playing that live, we can see that we get a pretty smooth preview of what that camera should be looking at on the feed. You can see here, simply seeing on the preview will get us like a preview feed in a sense. So it's not a raw feed, but a preview feed. But seeing that on our program monitor, we can see how accurate it is to the frame rate and resolution of that camera. Then overlaying some of our graphics on top of that video feed will pretty much give us a rather complete experience if we decided to do something like webcam out with that way. If you're using a Zoom call with your own web camera feed and overlaying graphics, it's perfect for that scenario. Let's go ahead and play these graphics offline for now, so we can move on to the next layer type, that being the media files. So we can simply, by navigating to import by right-clicking on our channel, have 3 different options. So this is, for example, layer, graphic, and then media. So simply by clicking media, we'll bring up our file explorer. We can navigate our library and see what it is that we want to incorporate into our production. Using this dropdown, we can sort by the 3 different file types. These are the 3 supported file types, as in video, audio file, or video, audio, image. And the following extensions are the things that we support. So that's pretty generous for video and the types of formats that we support. So technically, if, for example, you didn't have some kind of video player, you can, if you really wanted to, use TireLive as your video player for these file formats. You also have 2 different types of audio and then your image file formats. So let's go ahead and bring in one of these videos as an example directly into our channel so that we can kind of watch and see. I'm not sure what I'm feeling to import today. Let's go ahead and bring in that sea turtle directly into our channel. Do note that we're going to experience this short little load here. This is pretty much buffering the video clip, but kind of different from the way our graphics operate. If you used TireLive 4 or any of our other versions of the product in the past, if you wanted to bring in videos into your production, you had to do it through the designer and had to pretty much render out those videos frame by frame. However, the way you import media clips directly into the channel and for TireLive 5 pretty much buffers the clip and it has it immediately ready for playback. I've pretty much done this in the past where I have, for example, a 45-minute video clip of a demo I did. I load it directly into the channel. It's pretty much that short buffer time, and then that 45-minute video clip is ready for playback. And you'll see that by that example here, we get a relatively smooth playback in terms of the software respecting resolution and frame rate speed of that particular source. We can see that there's some additional properties that we can kind of play around with this particular media clip. We can loop the media clip. So if you want to use a media clip as a dynamic background that loops continuously for your production, we have access to that here. It will pretty much get the end point and the start point of that clip and loop through that iteratively. Now, we also have the start point and end point of that video clip. So for example, if you had a 5-minute video clip and you only wanted to capture a 2-minute segment of that clip for your production, you wouldn't have to re-export that video so that then you can bring it into your production to be ready for broadcast. You can simply set the custom start point and end point and then use that clip as desired when you then play it back. The other one finally being fade in and fade out. This is simply when you play in or when the video plays out on its own, it's going to be that fade out and how long that fade out will happen before it fully fades out. So we can bring that up from 3 frames all the way to 5 seconds, even to a minute if we really wanted to. The other thing that we can see here is that for both the live video source and the graphics, or the live video source and the media clip, we were able to see that we had those properties visible to us from the layer properties. So one thing that we decided to do is to carry that over to things like graphic layers themselves. If you used any of our products in the past, you may have become familiar with something called the attributes panel. We've pretty much condensed some of those attribute things from the attributes panel to be a little cleaner and offsetted some of those controls over directly into the channel playlist. So for example, things like duration, next layer, and delays all have been located now into the channel themselves, into the layers themselves from the channel. So for example, if I wanted to customize the duration of this first graphic on my playlist to last a total of 5 seconds, we now see that we have customized the duration of this first graphic to play out for only 5 seconds. Playing it out from my actual playlist will then play that for a short period and then dismiss it on its own. Then customizing the duration reveals another property that we can pretty much set to this particular graphic layer. We can assign something to play immediately after that graphic is done playing on its own. We can then assign lower third, the simple lower third below that, to play automatically after this graphic has pretty much retired its duration. We get that play in, and then the automatic play in for the next graphic. Then if we really wanted to, we can also add a delay for this graphic. So for example, if I wanted a 5-second delay to be added between the first graphic playing onto the second graphic, we have those controls exposed to us in a more logical position in our software, which would be next to the layer under our playout interface. So something a little bit cleaner in terms of if users in the past struggled finding this or just found it a little inconvenient where it was positioned in the past, we have it in a better location in the interface from the channels, from the layers workspace. Now, since we've offset those controls over directly into the channel, we now have what most people would refer to the things that we manually update for our graphic living here under live data. So if I want to start customizing this lower third manually, I can start editing these fields. I can put my first and last name as my name header, and we can put New Blue Webinar for our subtext, and we can see that it renders out these changes. This is also something that there's a little enter here, so I'm going to go ahead and erase that so we don't have a conflict of interest for the company name there. And we can see that it is rendering out those changes live, and not live onto my graphic yet, but just onto my preview. So then playing that out from my channel will then play out that graphic. We can see here my graphic is playing with the updates that I've done to it. And then as we saw, the other graphic plays automatically because it's still going on duration, but we can go ahead and disable that for now. We can set that to be 0 seconds. So we can then set it to be an unlimited duration. Do note that resetting it to be no duration will also get rid of the additional properties of next layer and delay. So we can see that everything that was enabled to be a parameter with a graphic will be customizable from the layer properties under live data. If you want to build your own graphics and have these attributes be visible and customizable from the playout interface, it's something known as a variable that we have to enable from the designer. But that is something I'll discuss later in a later portion of the demonstration, but good to keep in mind in case you're kind of waiting for that to come up as a thing that you can, as an instruction that you're waiting for to learn more about this particular function. The other thing that we decided to do is sometimes people don't want to be manually updating lower thirds every time they have to change the information for that lower third. Or one thing that we have available still in TireLive 5 and have had before in TireLive 4 is the ability to connect spreadsheets directly into a graphic, so that, for example, if you don't want to reduplicate a certain lower third or have to re-export a bunch of different lower thirds so that you have the same lower third represent 10 different names, you can simply build that out through a spreadsheet. Or one new feature that we added in TireLive 5 is using multi-entry to build out numerous versions of the same lower third. So let's say, for example, I wanted to have 2 different lower thirds that are part of this one single lower third. I can add Sean's name, first and last name here. I can add, I can say guest for now, even though he's a panelist. Guest is a little shorter than panelist, so I'll save some keystrokes there. We now have 2 different lines or 2 different rows for my lower third that I can operate from. So in the preview panel, we can quickly kind of click through these and see that I can preview my 2 different instances of this lower third. Now, if I play this graphic live, we can then see, actually, I'm going to remove channel 2 so we can get a full preview of that. of that graphic through channel 1, since I am screen sharing. So we'll go ahead and play that again. There's my first and last name, and now we go to line 2 to show Sean Wilmon. Then we will see that it'll automatically show the second line with animations and everything. However, an alternative workflow is, let's say, for example, we wanted to cue my name, play that live, and then it lives on screen for the time designated time or whatever desired time that we need it to be on screen, play that off, and then navigate to our second instance. It's ready on the back end, and then we simply play it on. So there's two different things that you can do in terms of playing back and updating these graphics so that you have a new instance ready. Additionally, you can build this multi-entry as long as you need it to be. So you can build out 20 entries of lower thirds or any other type of graphic to then be represented in this little interface that you then have access to push as a live update for your graphic. One thing that you might have noticed is that this multi-entry is also referencing these variables, name and message, to give us different columns to then access to build out that information. Color and gradient could be on here, but aren't, because there's another thing in the back end in terms of the designer, if they were allowed to update while live. And we'll see this being demonstrated in the designer portion of the demo. One other way of driving information directly onto our graphics is the ability to connect data sources to these graphics. So here for my social media message, we can see that I have currently something positioned in it. That's a tweet. But one thing that we can do is collect these tweets live by using our data controller. So simply by navigating to the data controller column, we can select this drop down. We have a variety of different options here. One is being an API tour, or some API examples, which we offer through Broadcast, which will allow you as a user or your broadcast crew, depending on your resources, to use our API to build custom interfaces or integrations with some data sources that we may not support. So for example, if you want to, per se, connect to a weather service, right, that's being hosted on a live news network, you then can build a custom interface or a data integration then that allows our software to read directly into that data source and then represent it through a graphic. The other one here, we have some things for gaming, so like Twitch, YouTube, and all that, for anybody that wants to use those. And then under general, we have custom clocks, JSON integrations, XML, RSS readers, spreadsheet, like I mentioned before, and text file reader. So for XML and JSON, if you have a data source like a live XML file or a live JSON file that's being written to, like, for example, something like Scoreboard or OCR, which constantly writes to an XML file, you can then use that XML file directly into a graphic, and the variables that are being used in the XML file will be automatically interpreted by TireLive. If those variables are then connected to the graphic, then it will automatically update the content within that variable. So for example, if you had a clock or a player score or a team score, sorry, then you would see those automatically update as the XML file automatically updates itself from the source that it's reading from. This other category that is brand new to TireLive 5 is the productivity category. This will contain Google and Microsoft, most notably Google Sheets and Slides, and I'll go over that after I kind of introduce a couple of these. Then we have the social media controllers. Do note that the social media controller access has now been expanded to something like Present. So if you want to use social media in Present, which was locked behind in the past behind our social product and our complete and broadcast product, you now have access to that through that to something like Present. So you have, for example, now the ability to use YouTube and Twitter or some of our other Facebook integrations other than just the live commenting, for example. Lastly, if you're interested in something like sports, this is what we'll ship with the sports edition of the software. So you can see here that we have a variety of different scoreboard tools and some statistical things like StatCrew and Sportscast. For example, if you want to drive scoreboard data directly from the cloud to a graphic, or if you want to manually update using one of our scoreboard tools to update a graphic, then you can use our graphic user interface to then update things like score clocks, penalties, flags, if the sport regards that particular parameter, etc. One thing that I can use as a quick example is to connect to the social controller. I can simply go ahead and navigate through the controllers and then select Twitter tweets. This will open up the interface to then access something like Twitter. We can see here I've already been signed into an account, and I can simply hit enter on some keywords, for example, Tyler Live. We can then see all the tweets done under the keyword Tyler Live. And do note that these tweets do populate based on most recent. So for example, Holden tweeted out on December 13th of this year at 2:10 a.m. are on Pacific Standard Time. So I wouldn't believe that they'd be tweeting out at 2 a.m. on their time, but do note that it will pretty much conform the tweet to your time zone. We'll see here that simply clicking on the play button on the graphic or on the little interface here will then automatically populate those elements onto the graphic itself and then play it out live with all of its animations. We can also add things to our playlist of actual posts. So right here, we can simply, by clicking on the post body here, we can cache these out. We can see the little loading there and then open our playlist to see our curated playlist of social media graphics. Then from here, if we desire to then play them out back to back, we have 2 duplicate tweets, but we can see here with this third, we have our third tweet there, pretty much conforming very nicely with all the stylistic elements of this particular graphic from this ceramic family. 2 of the new data controllers that we included with the software, or some of the Premiere controllers, I would better said, are the Google Sheets and the Google Slides integration. A few of our graphics families are actually going to include controllers that play pretty nicely with these. So for example, if you want to use something to use for your slides controller, we can then, or for your Google Slides, we can use Ceramic Slideshow. This will allow us to pretty much embed our slideshow within this image frame of the graphic. So if you ever want to build a slideshow graphic, simply all you would need to do is build out a graphic that has an image variable, and we can see that later in the designer with a quick run through of how to enable those different variables. But for this particular example, simply what we can do is access the data controllers, navigate to the productivity category, then go to Google, navigate to slides. We will see then it'll open a separate window under the layer properties as a third tab in this particular scenario as the Google Slides controller. And you will see that in mine, I've already signed into the Google Slides controller itself, but what you will get if you're doing this for the first time is simply a little login window for any Google account that you might have on your machine or that you don't. Simply, it's just the username field, password, and then you will be greeted by another screen that tells you to pretty much grant Google permissions to then access your drive. After you've granted those permissions, you will then see this interface here. If you desire to use this as an external browser source within the network, so for example, if you have another operator in your local area network that isn't on the same machine as you are, you can simply hand them off this URL or open in your other browser if you want to, and then you pretty much get access to that controller to then operate remotely within the same network. But moving on to the actual controller itself, we can see here that since it's connected to my Google Drive, it has detected 2 different presentations that are saved onto my Google Drive. This Tyler Live 5 slide deck and another just pretty basic slide deck example, but we'll use this nicer of the 2 examples. We will then navigate to the Tyler Live 5 presentation that lives on our Google Drive. So we will see immediately here a quick preview of every single slide that exists in that particular presentation. We can then, by clicking on any of these slides here, cue that graphic, then it'll play automatically once it's done caching. We can then either hit the play next button here to play the next graphic from our presentation, or click any other slide in case we want to skip or navigate back to then cue any other slide from our presentation to then play that graphic, play that out as a graphic. If I want to then end my presentation, simply I can go to the final graphic or the final slide, and then hitting the play next button will dismiss both the slide and the graphic. So it's a pretty clean out for your entire presentation once you're done with that particular portion of the production, if you do decide to incorporate this into your broadcast. Next is the Google Sheets controller. So we can go into this bullet list, for example. We can simply go into the productivity drop-down category and then connect our sheets as a new input. This, like the Google Slides controller, will then show every single document that's a Sheets document from that Google account to then use to connect to our actual graphic. So for example, if we go into Fruit that was modified 2 days ago, we can see an interface that looks very similar to multi-entry and also very similar to spreadsheets if you use that in the past, where we have access to a little bit different, different kind of thing. So we can see here from this actual interface, we have the ability through these little red icons to, when clicking them, get a small snap, a little thumbnail preview of our graphic. Then we can kind of hover over the different fields of our graphic that we can connect or assign that data to. For example, if we wanted to connect line 1 to our name, we can see here this name variable, and it also tells you in parentheses what type of variable it is. So for example, if I had an image square on the right here, like I have on some of these other graphics, we would get in parentheses that it is an image variable. That way you understand that you're pairing these with the correct type of variable so that it could actually read your information properly. So for line 1, we can simply connect it to our name header. We can see here with this green icon indicates that that information has then been linked. We can link line 2 to be the first line of our graphic, and then we can link to our third graphic. Unfortunately, I don't have enough fields on this particular spreadsheet to add to our actual graphic, but if I wanted to, I can go into that graphic itself. If, let's say, for example, Sean had that spreadsheet open on Google Drive, he can add several columns out, and then actually it'd probably be better if I just demonstrated that from the actual Google Sheet itself. So we can go ahead and see that I have access to our fruit document here.
Yeah, load it up in real time.
Yeah, show them what it's all about. So we can see here, we can then add line 4 as a column header to actually initialize that as a variable. So like we saw on our interface here, we can see that all of these column headers are initialized so that I can then represent that as different rows of information. So then understanding that, I can pretty much just emulate that through with consecutive lines. Something for Apple, we can say that it grows on a tree. This one grows on a tree as well. And this one grows on a tree as well. Then we can add line 5. Or line 5, sorry. I can say that I don't like them and I do like them. And then we can put no opinion. So then we can see after updating this particular sheet, we can see save to drive. This pretty much announces that this sheet has been updated. Now from the actual interface itself, we can then simply refresh here, and we can then see the new lines or the new rows of information that I can then use to connect to my graphic. So I can now add this to be line 3 for line 4, and then line 5 for line 4. It's a little bit out of misaligned on that sense, but we can then pretty much assume that we would name these accordingly. So let's go ahead and play this graphic live and then cue these changes out onto our actual graphic. So we can see here that, oh, I see, I connected it to the other rows. So we can see here that when I play this graphic live, we have our instance of information going live onto our graphic. We can see green, tart, tree, and I don't like. Then if I navigate to my third line, we can see that information automatically update onto our graphic, or if I desire to, I can use the play next button to then show the next line of information. But I also have access to autoplay controls. So for example, if I had 20 lines of information to display different types of fruit, if I wanted to, I can then set a custom delay in between each line and start autoplay. Then I have a custom delay between each line, and then it's a pretty much hands-off operation for that particular graphic in terms of that set of information.
So a
So
question from Jim Petramilli that's very relevant to what we're talking about now. If you typed Apple in line 1, would it automatically populate other lines?
so Apple in line 1. So here, for example, as in the actual,
I don't know. I guess I was hoping you would know.
I would probably need some extra clarification.
Yeah. Okay, that's fine.
But let's say, for example, you did want to customize this information. So let's say at line 1, row 2 is no longer apple, and now it is a green strawberry that is tart since it's no longer ripe. Funnily enough, that works perfectly fine for that example. So then we can see upon refreshing this, we then get an update of whatever it is that we customized. If we wanted to change these variable names at the top to be something like header, and then the consecutive ones to actually correspond properly to the variable names of that graphic, then change all this information, and hopefully it answers that question somewhat. We can then see that it's safe to drive. Simply refreshing that will update the variable names. If I do so, have to then reconnect since it's no longer a matching variable name, but we do have the option to then reconnect. But so there's a variety of things that you can do when it comes to incorporating pretty much what we would refer to a cloud workflow. So if you want to use something like a cloud presentation or a cloud spreadsheet to then drive information directly into your graphic, then you have these options at your disposal to pretty much have a remote operation if you desire, or just something as flexible as possible that is going to incorporate every single operator that you need and every single piece of information that you require.
So Jim followed up with some more information on that, but it sounds like what he's asking for. Let me actually just rephrase it. Jim Pitchermilly, if you type in Apple in line 1, would it automatically populate other lines? I believe he means the graphic itself. Specifically, typing in a player number would bring up all associated info. So I think what he's asking for is something that I've actually wanted to talk about and show off. I don't think I can easily show it off, but if you, Joe, could you go under settings? You'll see an option under settings called use instant search. And what that does is now when you type anything, then it will search for a graphic with that name. So where it says name field, we currently are looking at ceramic list. And so if you typed ceramic list +1 or ceramic list +2, then it will bring up cell information in ceramic list from row 1 or row 2.
Yeah. One thing that just reminded me, which was probably more so pertaining more specifically to what he said about Google Sheets, there is that find feature within the controller itself. So if I typed in Apple here, or Apple's no longer there.
Now.
So if we typed in orange, then we can see all the actual rows for orange pop up correspondingly. So then I can press enter for that, and then we can pretty much queue that out. I'll go ahead and stop, and then it's pretty much finds it within our playlist or within our actual sheet for our Google Sheet. I'm gonna move on a little bit so that we have some time for other things. Don't want to take too long on this, but any other questions you have, we will acknowledge them in the Q&A section of the webinar. So jumping into the other half of our software is a good way of saying it is the designer. So any of these graphics that you decide to bring in from the graphics library can be customized by simply right-clicking on them and hitting edit, or hitting edit while in the preview window. However, if you want to create a new one, you can simply go ahead and access new and then create a new graphic, and it'll pretty much sub in a little template here that I can then remove those fields or build off of that little template. But let's go ahead and inspect something that we've already had in our playlist here and edit it. So we can go ahead, right-click, edit. Now we have access to the actual design itself. So this is what we refer to as the designer, which is a separate window on its own, which allows us to design the graphics that we will use for our production. Here, if you've used anything like After Effects or Photoshop, if you have a certain workspace enabled, or Premiere, where we have a timeline that pretty much determines the runtime for that particular graphic. So we can see the end and start of that graphic, which is pretty much your play in and then whole play out. We have all of our design elements within, or our design layers for that graphic, separated as individual layers, along with their existence being determined by the length of their little bar here, denoting how long that element will persist along the timeline. Then another thing that we have additionally is this pause point. So this pause point determines where it is that the graphic will pause when we play it in from Tabular Live's playout interface. So for example, if I customize this pause point to happen before these design layers come in and appear, let's say, for example, this is our new pause point. We can confirm these changes by clicking on the green check mark. Then we will get a quick re-render for those updates. Then we will see that the graphic will pause before any text elements appear, because I have assigned that to be the pause point. So a good way of understanding that is pretty much everything before the pause point is our animate in. Everything after our pause point is our animate out. This allows us to pretty much remove any static duration on certain things. Since we can customize the duration of a graphic as to how long it stays on screen in our playout interface, we can customize things like delay. We don't have to then offset that with actual playtime on a specific graphic. Because one thing that I've seen in the past, and one thing from my own experience, is, let's say, for example, you have an export that's a video layer. That's your graphic from like After Effects. And you need that particular lower third piece to delay for about like 5 seconds or 10 seconds. That delay gets incorporated into the actual design itself so that you can actually get that delay that's desired. You can then an actual title alive, which is more efficient for the sake of performance, overhead, and just more customization flexibility for how that's treated during playout. If there is, you can offset that static duration to pretty much be one frame and then customize it from your playout interface. So there's a lot that you can do, and that's referencing back to the flexibility of graphics and just the level of customization that you have from within the designer and from the playout interface, and just the level of interplay that you have and the access that you have in terms of using different data controllers or just things being driven manually to have those graphics play out the way that you require them down to the accurate second or even frame. Other things that we can see from the designer interface is just like we saw in the live data preview or even multi-entry, if it was enabled as an update while live, is we can see a breakdown of all the variables that have been enabled on this particular graphic itself. We have our 2 name fields and then 4 different texture color fields. So if we click on any of these design layers from within the designer itself or on the actual canvas, we have the freedom to click from either the timeline area or the canvas. We can see here that clicking on this piece of text, we have different styling attributes. So if we needed to change the font or if we needed to change the color of that text element, we can then do that from here, convert it to a gradient or to be an image video texture if we wanted to, add additional styling. So if we wanted that particular text element to have an outline, it now has an outline. This will behave as a separate style element. So if you wanted to customize something, and if you look at our cinema collection, if you're familiar with it from our post library or even some of the collections that we've delivered in the past, that's pretty much the style elements. It's what it allows us to pretty much mock up a wide variety of different graphic design trends, because there's a lot of options in terms of gradients, texturing, overlapping some of these style elements so that you can get a more sophisticated look, and also the access to 3D controls, which allows us to bevel, extrude, and even if we wanted to rotate things in 3D space. Like I was mentioning, there's a variety of things that you can do with your different design layers to pretty much accomplish the stylistic goal and logic of, and in terms of animation, and if you desire to build out the graphics that you wish to have for your production. But one thing that we can see here is that, let's say, for example, this particular image square here, we can see that under the style settings in the style tab, it's enabled as a variable. This will pretty much allow it to be enabled as a texture variable, image variable, and we can see in this dropdown, we can name that if we wanted to, whatever we want. So we can name it to city image if we desire. That will change its variable name and will be then reflected in the playout interface as well. So you can then see city image is the variable name for this particular element. If we wanted to swap that out, we can also do that from the designer interface like we can from the live or for the playout interface. Other things like gradient and textures also have the same setting, where if you want to enable something as a color variable, simply going to the 3D face for that corresponding color, enabling it as a variable, and then either using the pre-populated text here or using a custom name, color white, for example, we can then see that this variable appears in our global tab as color white. And then if we wanted to, we can break its rules and then make it red. Another thing that we can also do is that, let's say, for example, we wanted to customize or enable a text variable. Under the motion and data tab, when selected on a text design layer, we can simply go to motion and data, scroll all the way to the bottom, and we see variable settings category. From here, we can then enable the text variable or disable it if it has been enabled. Then we can use a drop down to use some of these default names that we have here, or make your own. So we can then name this to subheader if that's our naming convention for a particular production. Check our global tab and then see that subheader is now the new name of that particular field. If we need to add our own or additional text elements, we can add something as static text, which will make it so that that text element is disabled by default as a variable. So it won't be a variable, it will simply just be a text flourish is a good way of saying it. So you can see here, this one did not populate onto my global tab and is not enabled as a variable under my variable category. But if I add a variable text, we can see this one automatically gets checkmarked as a variable and gets auto assigned a name. But we can also then customize this to be a variable name. In reference global tab, we can then see this one is now name. One thing that's interesting to note is that I currently have two things that are named name now. I have what used to be, or what currently is watch previous seminars and enter text to be name. But since they share a variable name, we can then customize that text so that they both show the same value. So if you have variable names that are matching across various texts or various textures that are the same image name or image variable name, or different colors or different pieces of your graphic that you want to be the same color but are different components, you can name those the same color variable name, and then that applied change will be then globally applied across those specific elements. When it comes to adding shapes, you have the option of adding ellipses, rectangles, or stars. Do note that both text, ellipses, rectangles, and stars are all vectors within the software. So I can resize these however I want, and the edges of these shapes won't be compromised in terms of quality, like aliasing and whatnot, or pixelation. This also brings in another interesting thing, is that you can also import your own vectors. So you can see a variety of different things that I can directly import into this particular design. I see images, videos, image sequences, vectors, which have to be in EPS format, and Photoshop files. So if you have a Photoshop file that you've already worked on, if you have a design package that was delivered to you, or if you have designers that exclusively are familiar with Photoshop, you can pretty much import Photoshop files and then use those as your graphic and use the pause point from the designer to then play those out. And quickly going over one last thing that I think is critical for understanding the designer is that with these particular graphics from the library, they will already come with animations. But if you want to add your own, you can see for this particular one of accent, this design layer named accent, I can drop down this little arrow and we can see the animation for the fade in, that's our animate in and out. But if I wanted to animate, for example, this ellipse, I can simply click on it, navigate to the transitions tab. This will automatically, if my library is open, organize a little folder area in our library that shows us all of our transitions or animations that are transitions. We can see here a couple of different collections of animations. Here's some fade-ins, some fly-ins, some pop-ups, some overlays. We can use this infinity one if we desire, and then we get presets of this particular set. So we can quickly mouse over to get a preview of how that's being applied to our design layer. If we wanted to, let's say, for example, preview this over a piece of text, we can then look at infinity and see how it is that it treats text. We can see that there's a leaping letters one. So we can also customize if an animation applies to a piece of text letter by letter, word by word, or line by line. Different, let's say, for example, we want to apply this particular transition. We simply drag it to this transitions area, or directly onto the layer at the beginning to make it an animate in, or at the end to make it an animate out. Then we can customize the duration of that transition within the layer by sliding or squishing down that little layer to determine its duration. We can see how much we trimmed it by frames with the little pop-up there. And then every single transition collection or preset is going to have its own custom parameters depending on the behavior that that transition consists of. Since this one uses an angle for the vaulting animation, and we can also do fade-ins, we can then see that by making a 100% fade and then vaulting up from the right corner, changes that to then vault it from the right and fade in. We can then apply that to paragraphs, so we can see that apply to all the letters. So a lot of things that you can do, and it will take some time to become familiar with all the things that ship with our library in terms of animations, effects, and whatnot. But I mean, it does get you pretty far in terms of creating graphics. Just as an example, every single graphic from the graphics library was created with the things and tools provided within the designer. So that is, if if relief, some semblance of confidence as to your ability to build whatever you want from here.